Okay, it's time to talk about everyone's favorite part, the fabric. I'm going to show you first what I have in the kits that I've put together. So you are going to need a fabric for your background. I have chosen for the kits a medium weight linen. It's a gray. I like this because it's nice. Well, I just love linen. I love working with it. I love the way it looks. I love the way it quilts up. But this one is a nice one to paint on. It doesn't bleed very badly, and I just found that it works quite nicely. So that's what I've got for your background in the kits and what you'll need if you're putting your own together. I did include the Quilt-Along shape flex that you need in the kits as well. For your floral hair, you're going to need something to go on the background of it to create a dark outline around it so that it will stand out apart from the background. So that's what this is. I believe this is a fat eighth. Also 2 fat eighths for your tulip stems and leaves. I did not use the exact same fabrics for the kits that I used in my sample quilt because not all of the same fabrics were still available. But choose something for your stem outline that's maybe a little bit darker than what you put on the foreground of the stems. So this I would use probably as my background, and this is my foreground since it's got basically a lighter tone to it. Lighter value. Also for your tulips, you're going to need something to use for the upper parts of the tulip and something for the lower parts. Here I've got a fat 16th, and I believe this one is also a fat 16th, and that will suffice. The size for that is roughly 9 inches by 11 inches. This is for the stamen stems on the tulips, and this is for the stamen tops. So each tulip has, I believe, 5 stamens that come out of it. You'll need, I think this one's a fat eighth, and this one's like about a 6 by 6 inch square piece. For the mushrooms, you'll want 2 different fabrics for the tops. I like to choose things that are kind of polka dotty and bright, and then something for the stems. I like to do something a little bit less bright, a little bit more neutral, so that the stems look natural and the tops kind of pop. These are all fat eighths. So 9 by 11 inch. For your hair collage, you're going to want around 8 to 10 different fabrics for that. What I look for when I'm looking for the fabrics to use in my collage, I'm looking at the elements on there. So for example, these flowers I would consider an element, but not just the entire flower. I also might want to use individual petals, and I did when I put together my first hair. So think about that, which parts you might want to use and how you could use them. This right here doesn't really have elements in it. If I used this in a collage, I would probably have this cover a fairly large portion of the background to kind of act as a foundation to some of the elements. That helps just to kind of fill in the gaps behind and also cover spaces quickly so that you aren't as overwhelmed trying to cover every single little space. 1 or 2 fabrics like that as kind of just like a background foundation is great. And then as you're looking at your other fabrics, look at the size of the elements too, not just how you could use them, but you want to have a variety of sizes. So this is more of a small. I would call these sunflowers a large. These may be a medium to large, and then on here you've got a little bit of both, kind of a medium element right here, and I'd call this a small. These I would also call small. I might use this more as a background cover, like I was talking about with that one, because these would be hard to cut out, but you could cut them out. You could cut around the outsides and use that. Same goes with this, although I think you could use it either way, either in the background or cut out portions of it to make parts of the hair. This, I would say, has both large and small. You could use the large flower, you could use just the parts of the petals, you could use the center, so that would work for lots of things. I'd call this more of a medium to large, and again you could use just the center, you could use the whole flower. And then this I'd call same thing. It's got both medium, small, medium, and large. And you could also even put that in the background. Another thing you want to pay attention to is the values of your fabrics. So you don't want them all to be really light, or your hair will look really flat, unless that's what you're going for. If you want your hair to look quite flat, then then all light values would be fine. But I kind of like to put darker areas in the area of the hair that I imagine would be in the shade, and that kind of helps it to have a little bit of roundness and a little bit of form, where I might put lighter areas where I would imagine, the sun is creating a highlight. You might also think about just whether you feel like your fabrics and the colors go well together. So for this, I chose basically a monotone hair. It's going to be a blue hair, even though there is a little bit of some other colors in there. But even within blue, you can have colors that don't really work together. In this case, some of these are more cool and some are more warm. I'd call, say, this more of a cool color, a cool blue, although it does have a somewhat warm brown in it. But this one, to me, is quite warm. It goes a little more toward a yellowy green than just a blue. This one, though, I would call quite cool. I really don't see any warm yellows or reds or greens in there. So you can go for a palette that is all cool. You can blend them together as long as they balance. So when I look at this, I feel a good balance of cool and warm. And as I put these out on the hair, I would try to keep it balanced so that I don't have one section that's all warm fabrics and another that's all cool. That would kind of create, kind of a dissonance, I would say, in the hair. So those are a few things to think about as you're choosing your fabrics. And then most of all, just choose fabrics that have elements that you love and that you think would be fun to use and that would lend themselves really well to the collage that you're creating. Just a few more. You're going to be creating raw edge applique for the leaves of the bluebells, the body of the caterpillar. I went with a really funky fabric for that. The caterpillar's eyes, gold fabric for your pocket watch, and then something to go on the face of the pocket watch that sets itself apart. And then this is for the white part of the hare's eyes. For the dark outline of the eyes, I am going to be using a piece of this. For the iris, I would choose from probably not one of my blues, because that would not stand out very well. I would probably use a piece of one of these oranges. You could possibly go with a green. That's all according to your preference, but I would choose something that will pop because you really want, the eye to be part of what the viewer notices and focuses on. I want to talk about your background fabrics. The fabrics that are going to give you the least trouble are going to be the ones that don't bleed very much. Fabrics that are tightly woven and dense tend to bleed less. I've found in my experience that the linens tend to bleed less than the cottons. So I'm going to show you a fabric test on a couple of different fabrics that I've got here. Let's just start out with a cotton that you can see well. If you're at the fabric store, you can ask them if they would mind, just cutting off a little piece. You don't need much, 1 inch square is more than enough. But if you have your fine point marker, you're just going to hold it down on the fabric, just rest it on there lightly, and count to 10 slowly. So that's spread out. You can see it's quite a bit larger than the point of the pen. So you know what to expect. This fabric is going to do some bleeding. You can make it work with the no flow, but it's good to know in advance what to expect. This is, I believe it's a linen. This is a fabric that I got from a thrift store. It's actually what I think I'm going to use in my sample quilt that I make along with you for the Quilt-Along. I decided to go for more of a natural looking quilt this time. I've done, kind of whimsical Wonderland colors for my other quilts, and I decided to go a little more natural this time. So you can see it didn't bleed nearly as much. I did get some bleed, and I find it's likely you will get at least a little. It's uncommon to find a fabric that doesn't bleed at all, but this is actually a good example of one that only bleeds a bit. I would choose something that is not too busy or bold or bright because there's so much going on in the pattern. If you choose something like that, it's all going to jumble together and you're not really going to notice the individual details. So a couple examples that I brought of something that I probably wouldn't choose. Something like this. If you could make this work. I'm a firm believer that rules were made to be broken. I think you could make this work, but what you would probably need to do is have the foreground elements, the hair and the tulips and all of the other parts, be a white or a very light or possibly even very bright, solid. You need to pick colors like that could pop, and it's hard to find things that are going to pop when your background is this bright and busy. This one I think you could use, but there's so much motion. I think your pussy willows would get lost in this. And the same thing with this one. I love a stripe, but there's so much motion going on here. Plus, you know, with these diagonal lines, all the colors, I think your pussy willows would get lost here too. One thing you want to think about is you're going to have the white puffs. I think if the white puffs ended up being in one of the lighter areas, they might disappear. Same thing with this one as with this one. It's just busy. I think you'd lose your pussy willows in that, and same with this one. I feel the same way about this one as I do about this first one I showed you. I think you could make it work. It would just be harder to find fabrics for your applique and your collage that would pop on this background. Now, you also probably don't want to use a white because your pussy willow puffs will not show up on that. I'm going to discourage you from using anything too dark as well. I like this and I would be tempted to use it, but I would be concerned that the brown parts of the pussy willows would disappear into this. So for the same reason, you probably wouldn't want to use a medium to dark brown, and you may not want to use a black unless you maybe switch up your paint or ink colors and use a lighter brown that could stand out on a dark surface. Like I said though, I honestly, firmly, truly believe that rules were made to be broken, and I love to see people break them and see the ways they make it work and they come up with something totally new and innovative. So some that I think would work well, this has a, very muted background that would allow the things to pop, but it has a little bit of interest with the lines that almost look like stitches running through it. This one to me is a little on the busy side, but this is probably about as busy as I would go and still feel like it could work. And then I love a pinstripe. It's kind of formal, but because it's going to be in the background, it's not supposed to take center stage, and I actually really think I would like this as a background for this quilt. This does have, the white on the gold, and more of a pattern that jumps out, but I think you could definitely put anything, on top of it and make it, and it would pop. I think it would be really cool to do some old-fashioned fabrics for this, and it would kind of give it a storybook character. Since Alice in Wonderland is like an older book, I think that would be a nice look for it. This time around, you could go with a color that's just got a subtle pattern as a blender. It's kind of similar to that Civil War that I showed you. I really like this one. The value is dark enough that the white would pop on this. Solids would be great. Just make sure you pick one that's not white or too dark. And then just a couple others that are just basically kind of subtle background blenders that I think both of these could work quite well for this quilt. So I am going to try to make a hair that is shades of white and gray and leading into black. So I got a bunch here. I often use the process of elimination to select my fabrics. So I'm going to show you how I would go through this and eliminate. I'm looking to see if I have got a range of values from light to dark, which I do. I made sure that I did. And I've got a range of sizes in my prints and in the elements of the prints. So these I'd call small. These would be larger, going to medium, then some large, more, large ones. So that's the second thing I would look at. And of course then some down here that really have a very subtle print that you couldn't really cut out and use for elements, but they could cover some of the background quite nicely to give a foundation to these other ones. When I look at these, aside from the things I've told you, I like to just kind of see if they play well together. So sometimes you will have different temperatures. So you'll have warm and cool all mixed together, and you can make it work if you balance it. But sometimes you'll have mostly cool. And then if you stick a warm in there, so for example, let's look at these. These right here are mostly colors that I would use for background, and they're mostly cool. Actually, no, I take that back. These are somewhat warm. These, I'd call these grays here have a little bit of a warmness to them, whereas this one is quite cool. And I don't know if you're getting, with your picture, if you're getting the same colors that I'm seeing, but these I'd say are more of a warm gray, where this is a cool. But I wanted to pop this one in there. This one is quite a greeny. It's got a lot of green to it, although it is a gray. It's got gray and black. When I put that in there, it kind of sticks out to me like a sore thumb. I probably will not use this one, or if I do, I would only use small pieces and try to make sure that they're not popping out and sticking out. A good example of a really cool gray versus a warm gray. So these ones, as I mentioned, were more on the warm side. This is very cool, and they can kind of clash with each other, even though they're both grays. I'm leaning more toward doing the warm grays, and so I probably wouldn't want to have this as a foundation, this one, or have a lot of this one. Like I said, with the other one that was kind of a greeny gray, if I were using more cool grays, that doesn't work as well, you know, against a cool background. But I think I'm leaning more toward the warm, so what I might do is eliminate this one and keep this one, where this one's more of a cool. I might eliminate that one. This has got some greens and some yellows in it, but the overall tone to me is more of a gray. And then I've got a bunch of these that came together in the Wilmington, their version of a layer cake that was just a bunch of different batiks that were plays on whites and grays with, you know, a little bit of greens and pinks and so on mixed in. So I pulled some out that had grays that I thought could work with my hair. A fabric like this, you might not necessarily even look at it because it's got these bright oranges, and if you know you're not creating an orange hair and you don't want, you know, these would definitely stand out, but I think I might be able to use these stripes. I don't know for sure, but I'm going to just fuse some Steam-A-Seam to these stripes, and as I'm putting my floral collage together, I'm going to see if I can work those into it and see if I like it. I like the fact that they're uneven, they have a whimsical look to them, and I think I might be able to make them work. I really never know until the end if the things that I've chosen, if I'm going to even use them. I don't know until I've kind of played around and started laying things out and seen what I like. I do cut out quite a few different elements, and some of them I just don't even end up using at all, but I save them because I plan to use them later in another collage that I do. Enough said about choosing your fabric for your collage. This is one that I quite love. I'm looking forward to playing with that one. If you have any questions about that, feel free to email me and I will make sure I answer your questions. I'll answer them in an email to everyone so that if anyone else has the same question, we can make sure they get their answers. Okay, so that's it for fabric. Now let's talk about printing out and assembling your patterns.